Admiral Catherine Steele Kate Morrison stood motionless before the holographic display, her weathered features illuminated by the red emergency lights of the ESS Resilience Command Center. The massive display showed New Mars' orbital defense grid failing point by point, each failure represented by another light winking out in the three-dimensional projection. "How long until total colony loss?" she asked, her voice steady despite the horror unfolding before her. Lieutenant Jessica Hayes, her communications officer, swallowed hard before responding. "At current pace, New Mars will fall within 3 hours, Admiral. The Concordat ships." She paused, checking her readings. "They're moving in perfect synchronization. We've never seen anything like it." Morrison's steel-gray eyes narrowed as she studied the enemy's movement patterns. The Concordat fleet moved like a single organism, hundreds of ships flowing through space with impossible precision. When the colonial defense forces adapted their tactics, the alien ships responded instantly, as if they'd known the change was coming before it happened. "Show me the last hour's engagement," Morrison ordered, her fingers drumming against the command console. "Focus on Grid Section 7. A holographic display shifted, zooming in on a particularly brutal exchange between 3 colonial frigates and a squadron of Concordat vessels. Morrison leaned forward, her expression intense as she watched the battle play out again. "There," she said suddenly, freezing the display. "Every ship in their fleet stops for exactly 2.3 seconds before changing formation." Lieutenant Hayes confirmed this across all engagement zones. The next few minutes were filled with rapid analysis as the bridge crew compiled data from multiple battles. The pattern held true. Every Concordat ship, without exception, exhibited the same brief pause before tactical changes. "It's like they're waiting for orders," Morrison muttered, more to herself than her crew. "But that's impossible at these distances. Even with our best quantum entanglement tech, there's still a delay." Her thoughts were interrupted by a new alert. The holographic display expanded to show multiple systems, and Morrison's heart sank. The attack on New Mars wasn't an isolated incident. Reports were coming in from every human colony within 50 light-years. The Concordat had launched a coordinated strike across human space. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Morrison ordered, her mind racing through possibilities. "And someone find me every scrap of intel we have on Concordat communication systems. There's something here we're missing." As her crew scrambled to comply, Morrison watched another colonial defense platform fall. The Concordat ships moved with such precision that it almost seemed beautiful, like a deadly dance choreographed by some cosmic intelligence. But that brief hesitation, that tiny flaw in their perfect performance, it meant something. "Admiral," Hayes called out, her voice tense. "Earth Command is responding, but we're getting reports of quantum communication disruptions across all channels. The Concordat is doing something to our long-range comms." Morrison's expression hardened. Whatever the aliens were using to coordinate their attacks, it was unlike anything humanity had encountered before. But that 2.3-second delay, it was a thread, and she intended to pull it until something unraveled. "Send a tight beam message to all remaining colonial forces," she ordered. "Tell them to fall back to secondary positions and observe enemy movement patterns. We need more data on these pauses." As the orders went out, Morrison turned her attention back to the falling colony. New Mars had been humanity's first major extrasolar settlement, a symbol of their expansion into the stars. Now it was becoming something else. The opening move in a war that would either break humanity or force them to evolve beyond their limitations. "We'll find your weakness," she promised the silent enemy ships on her display. "And when we do, we'll make you regret teaching us how to use it." The red emergency lights continued to pulse, casting shadows across the command center as humanity's first major defeat in interstellar war unfolded before them. But in that defeat, Admiral Catherine Morrison had found something precious, A flaw in the enemy's perfection. Now she just had to figure out how to turn that flaw into humanity's salvation. Dr. James Walker's laboratory in the lower levels of Luna Base looked more like a museum of obsolete technology than a modern research facility. Vintage radio equipment lined the walls, their analog dials and vacuum tubes standing in stark contrast to the holographic displays floating above his workstation. The former SETI scientist had always believed that understanding the past was key to breaking new ground in the future. "You're telling me the most advanced species in known space has a blind spot?" Admiral Morrison asked, her voice carrying a mix of skepticism and hope as she examined the cluttered lab. She'd made the trip to Luna Base personally after reading Walker's initial report. Walker grinned, running a hand through his disheveled gray hair. "Not just a blind spot, Admiral. They've got a full-blown Achilles heel." He moved to a workbench where an ancient shortwave radio sat next to a modern quantum communication array. "See this old radio? It's technologically primitive, but it has one major advantage. It doesn't need a network to function." He activated a holographic display, showing the battle data from New Mars. The Concordat's ships move in perfect synchronization because they're all connected through a quantum network. It's like a hive mind, but artificial. Every tactical decision is made centrally and transmitted instantaneously across their fleet. That explains the 2.3-second delay, Morrison mused, watching the pattern play out. They're waiting for Central Command to process and respond. Exactly. Walker's eyes lit up with academic excitement. But here's the beautiful part. They're not just using this system. They're completely dependent on it. Look at this. He pulled up another display showing historical records of Concordat ship movements going back decades. Morrison leaned in, her expression intent. The patterns are identical. They haven't changed their basic combat algorithms in over 50 years, Walker confirmed. They can't. Their entire military structure is built around this communication system. Take it away. He snapped his fingers. And you've got the most advanced paper tigers in the galaxy. The Admiral's mind raced with the implications, but their quantum network is far more advanced than anything we have. We can't hack it or shut it down. Walker's grin widened as he picked up the old radio. We don't need to hack it. We just need to make it impossible for it to function. He turned a dial, and static filled the room. Sometimes, the best way to deal with a complex system is to introduce a little chaos. He led Morrison to another workstation, where complex equations floated in the air. I've been studying the quantum signature of their communications. It's incredibly sophisticated, but it's also incredibly sensitive. The slightest disruption in the quantum field would cascade through their entire network. And you know how to create that disruption? Morrison asked, beginning to see the possibility. Better than that, Walker replied, bringing up a simulation. I know how to create a zone of complete quantum silence. No faster than light communications, no quantum entanglement, nothing but good old-fashioned light speed physics. The simulation showed a sphere of influence expanding through space, disrupting all quantum communications in its path. The only problem is, it would affect our systems too. We'd be just as blind as them. Morrison watched the simulation play out, her military mind already calculating the possibilities. But unlike them, we still remember how to fight blind. She turned to face Walker. How soon can you have a working prototype? With the right resources. 2 weeks. Walker's expression turned serious. But Admiral, this is theoretical technology. The testing phase alone cooled. We lost 3 more colonies while I was en route to Luna. Morrison cut him off. You have 1 week. She headed for the door, then paused. And Dr. Walker, when you file the official project documentation, call it Darkwave. That has a better ring to it than quantum silence. As the Admiral's footsteps faded, Walker turned back to his workbench, picking up the old radio again. "Time to make the stars go silent," he muttered, and began to work. The Mariana Deep Space Research Facility had never been this crowded. 3 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean's surface, the vast complex hummed with frantic energy as Earth's brightest minds worked against an increasingly desperate clock. Dr. Walker stood before the prototype darkwave device, a massive sphere of interconnected quantum matrices that pulsed with an ominous blue light. The Concordat just took Saturn's orbital stations, Admiral Morrison announced as she entered the testing chamber, her uniform bearing the fresh wrinkles of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Tell me you have good news, Doctor." Walker gestured to the sphere. "We've successfully generated a quantum disruption field in lab conditions. Small scale, but the theory's sound." He paused, running diagnostic data through his tablet. "The bad news is the power requirements are astronomical. We're talking about enough energy to power New York City for a year, just to create a disruption field the size of a solar system. I don't care if we have to strip mine Mercury for power cells," Morrison replied, her voice sharp. "Can it stop them?" Before Walker could answer, the facility's emergency alerts began blaring. Red warning lights bathed the chamber in a crimson glow. Lieutenant Hayes's voice came through the intercom, tense but professional. "Admiral, we're detecting multiple Concordat vessels entering the Kuiper Belt. They've broken through the outer defense line." Morrison's expression hardened. "How long until they reach Earth?" "At current velocity, 4 days." The Admiral turned back to Walker. "Looks like you've got a new deadline, Doctor. What do you need?" Walker ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit that had only gotten worse since the project began. "The device works, but there's a bigger problem." He brought up a holographic display showing strategic simulations. "Once we activate it, we'll be just as blind as them. No quantum comms, no faster-than-light targeting systems, nothing that relies on quantum mechanics. We'll be fighting like we're in the 21st century." "Then we'll fight like it's the 21st century," Morrison stated flatly. She moved to the holographic display, manipulating it to show Earth's defense grid. During World War II, submarines operated under radio silence for months at a time. They used pre-planned protocols and independent initiative. "We can do the same in space." One of the scientists, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, spoke up from her workstation. "Admiral, with all due respect, space combat is infinitely more complex than naval warfare. The calculations required for basic maneuvering alone will have to be done by hand if necessary." Morrison cut her off. She turned to address the entire room. "The Concordat has spent centuries letting their technology think for them. We haven't. Every human ship captain still knows how to calculate a firing solution without computer assistance. Every navigator can still plot a course using visual references. We've kept these skills because we're stubborn and traditional. And now that stubbornness might save our species." Walker watched the Admiral's words land with the assembled scientists and engineers. She was right. Humans had never fully trusted their technology, always maintaining manual backups and redundancies. What had seemed like primitive paranoia might now be their greatest asset. "We'll need to test it," he said finally. "A full-scale test, with real ships and combat conditions. If we get the resonance frequency wrong, we could end up collapsing the quantum field instead of disrupting it. The results would be catastrophic." Morrison nodded. "I'll have 3 destroyers diverted to the testing range near Pluto. They're old ships, minimal quantum tech. Perfect for this kind of trial run." As the Admiral issued orders and the science team returned to their work with renewed purpose, Walker found himself staring at the prototype. The device that might save humanity looked almost beautiful, its pulsing light reflecting off the reinforced walls of the underground chamber. But there was something else in those rhythmic pulses, something that reminded him of an old truth. Sometimes the only way to deal with a superior force was to change the rules of engagement entirely. They were about to turn off the stars themselves, or at least humanity's ability to read them. The question was whether they could navigate in the darkness they were about to create. Major David Wildcard Thompson stood in the combat simulator pod, sweat beading on his forehead as he manually calculated another firing solution. The pod's interface was dark, all quantum-based systems disabled. Outside, Admiral Morrison watched through the observation window as he called out the solution. Target bearing 347 Mark II, range estimated 50,000 kilometers, velocity vector positive z-axis at 7.3 kbs. His voice was steady despite the strain. Firing solution computed, 15-degree starboard rotation, plus 5-degree pitch. Fire on my mark. The simulator flashed green. A direct hit. That's your third perfect shot without computer assistance, Morrison said as Thompson emerged from the pod, his flight suit dark with perspiration. How's your squadron progressing? Thompson wiped his face with a sleeve. Getting better. Lieutenant Rodriguez can hit targets at extreme range using just visual cues, and Commander Chen's memorized every standard formation in the book. But fighting blind is the easy part. He gestured to the massive display, showing the status of all training squadrons. It's the coordination that's killing us. Morrison nodded, studying the display. Operation Wolfpack had been running for 2 weeks, training elite crews to fight without quantum technology. The casualty rate in the simulations was staggering. Nearly 60% of all engagement scenarios ended with human ships accidentally firing on each other or colliding during complex maneuvers. "Show me the last squadron exercise," she ordered. The display came to life, showing 12 ships attempting to execute a complex attack pattern without communications. It was like watching a ballet where half the dancers were blindfolded. Beautiful when it worked, catastrophic when it didn't. "We're using old light signal systems," Thompson explained, bringing up the protocol documentation. "Morse code with laser pulses, position lights for basic maneuvers. It's slow, but it works. The real innovation is this." He switched the display to show a series of complex flight patterns. "We call it predictive maneuvering." Morrison leaned forward, intrigued. "Explain." Each ship in the squadron memorizes a set of pre-planned responses to specific situations. If we spot an enemy formation, everyone knows exactly how the rest of the squadron will react without having to be told. It's like a chess game where all the moves are planned 20 steps in advance. "But the enemy won't follow a script," Morrison pointed out. Thompson grinned. "That's where the wild card protocols come in. Each ship captain has authorization to break formation and improvise if they spot an opportunity. The rest of the squadron is trained to adapt and support the new strategy based on visual cues alone." As if to demonstrate, the simulation showed a squadron breaking apart and reforming around a sudden attack vector, each ship moving in perfect harmony, despite the lack of communication. It was rough, instinctual, almost primitive, but it worked. "We're not trying to match their precision," Thompson said, his expression serious. "We're embracing chaos as a tactical advantage. The Concordat's ships can't handle random variables. Their whole combat doctrine is based on perfect information and perfect coordination. Take that away, add some unpredictable human intuition, and their greatest strength becomes their greatest weakness." Morrison finished. She watched another simulation run, noting how the human ships moved more like a wolf pack than a military unit, each member acting independently, but somehow maintaining coherence as a group. "How soon can you have a full combat group ready?" she asked. Thompson checked his datapad. 3 days for basic competency. A week if you want us really sharp. You have 5 days. Morrison turned to leave, then paused. "The Concordat just took Jupiter's moons. When Darkwave goes live, I need your wolves ready to hunt in the dark." "We'll be ready," Thompson promised, already heading back to the simulator pod. "Just make sure Dr. Walker's device works as advertised. My people are getting pretty good at fighting blind. Be a shame if we had to do it for nothing." As the Admiral left, the sound of combat simulations filled the training facility once again. In the darkness of disable technology, humanity was learning to embrace its most primitive and powerful weapons: instinct, adaptation, and the ability to find order in chaos. The mining colony on Proxima Centauri b had been under siege for 17 days. The Concordat fleet hung in high orbit like a net of stars, their ships moving in their usual perfect formation. They had no reason to rush. Their intelligence showed no human relief force within 50 light years, and the colony's resources would run out long before then. They never saw the cargo freighter coming. The ESS Lucky Break, an ancient hulk of a ship, limped into the system, looking like just another refugee vessel. Its hull was scared, its engine signature erratic. The Concordat ships barely gave it a second look as it drifted toward the planet's outer orbit. Inside the freighter's cargo hold, Dr. Walker made his final adjustments to the Darkwave device. "Power levels optimal," he reported, his voice tense. "Quantum field resonance is stable. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Major Thompson's voice crackled over the short-range radio from his hidden squadron's position behind Proxima's largest moon. "Admiral, Wolfpack Squadron is in position. All ships running silent, weapons hot. Begin the countdown," Admiral Morrison ordered from her command post on the Lucky Break. "Remember, once we activate this thing, we'll be as blind as they are. Every ship for themselves until the job is done." 30 seconds to activation, Walker announced. The device's core began to pulse with that now familiar blue light, building in intensity. 20 seconds. Power curve is nominal. Morrison watched the tactical display, showing the positions of both Concordat and human forces. In moments, that display would go dark, along with every other quantum-based system in the ship. They would be fighting with basic sensors, visual sighting, and pure human instinct. 10 seconds. Thompson's squadron waited in formation. Their ship's position lights darkened, running on minimal power to avoid detection. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The universe blinked. Every quantum-based system in the system went dark simultaneously. The Concordat fleet's perfect formation shattered instantly as ships lost contact with their command network. Confusion turned to chaos as the alien vessels began to drift, their crews struggling to operate without their neural link. "Now," Thompson's voice cut through the darkness. His squadron erupted from behind the moon, position lights flashing in prearranged patterns. The ships moved like a pack of hunting wolves, each captain acting on training and instinct. The first Concordat ship fell to a perfectly placed railgun shot from Lieutenant Rodriguez's destroyer. The second and third followed quickly as Commander Chen's wing executed a perfect scissor maneuver, catching the confused alien vessels in a deadly crossfire. "This is actually working," Walker breathed, watching through the freighter's ancient optical telescope. The Concordat fleet was in complete disarray, their ships either drifting helplessly or making clumsy, uncoordinated attempts to fight back. Morrison allowed herself a tight smile. They've never fought without their network. They don't even know how to target weapons manually. She keyed the short-range radio. "All ships, execute attack pattern Delta. Remember your training." The human squadron broke apart and reformed, using their position lights to coordinate. Each ship moved with deliberate purpose, their crews falling back on weeks of intensive training. They weren't as fast or as precise as the Concordat had been, but they were functioning. More than functioning, they were winning. "Enemy fleet is breaking up," Thompson reported. "They're trying to retreat, but their navigation systems are compromised. Permission to pursue." "Negative," Morrison replied. "Hold position and secure the colony. Let them run. They'll take news of this back to their command. Let them know that humans can fight in the dark." As the remaining Concordat ships fled in disarray, Dr. Walker checked the darkwave device's readings. "Field stability is holding. We could maintain this quantum silence indefinitely." Morrison nodded, already planning the next phase. "Send word to Earth Command. Operation Darkwave is a success. Tell them to begin mass production immediately." She paused, looking out at the battlefield where human ingenuity had just defeated superior technology. "And tell them to prepare for Phase 2. It's time to take the fight to the enemy." The stars remained silent over Proxima Centauri, but in that silence, humanity had found its voice. "They're learning," Admiral Morrison said, studying the tactical display in Earth's underground command center. The holographic map showed dozens of engagement zones where darkwave devices had been deployed. "Look at the Tau Ceti incident." The display zoomed in on a recent battle, showing a Concordat fleet deliberately sacrificing 3 cruisers to destroy a single darkwave device. The alien ships had rammed the device at full speed, their quantum cores detonating on impact. Major Thompson, recently promoted to colonel after his successes, nodded grimly. "They're adapting faster than expected. Instead of trying to fight in the silence, they're going all out to destroy the devices before we can activate them." Dr. Walker, who had been quietly running calculations on his tablet, looked up. "The physics make sense. A quantum core detonation would disrupt the darkwave field long enough for their remaining ships to escape. Crude, but effective. But expensive," Morrison added. "They're trading capital ships just to counter our technology. That's not a sustainable strategy." The discussion was interrupted by Lieutenant Hayes, who rushed into the command center with a datapad. "Admiral, you need to see this. We're getting reports from the civilian sector." The tactical display shifted to show commercial shipping lanes. Dozens of merchant vessels had begun equipping themselves with miniaturized darkwave devices, creating random zones of quantum silence throughout human space. "The merchants are fighting back," Thompson said, a note of admiration in his voice. "They're running silent ships through Concordat territory, disrupting their communications networks at random." Morrison studied the new data with interest. "How are they getting the devices?" "That would be my fault," Walker admitted. "I may have released the basic schematics to a few trusted contractors. The civilian version isn't as powerful as our military models, but it's forcing the Concordat to spread their forces thin," Morrison finished. "They can't predict where the next zone of silence will appear. Every merchant ship is now a potential threat to their command and control structure." The display updated again, showing a new pattern of Concordat fleet movements. The alien ships were breaking up into smaller groups, trying to cover more territory. Their once perfect formation was beginning to look ragged, stretched too thin across too much space. "We've got them off balance," Thompson observed, "but they're still holding most of our major colonies. We need something bigger than guerrilla tactics." Morrison's expression hardened. "Show me the status of Project Thunder." The display shifted once more, showing a massive production facility hidden in the asteroid belt. Dozens of new darkwave devices were under construction, each one more powerful than the last. 50 devices will be ready within the week, Walker reported. "But Admiral, the power requirements for a synchronized activation will be met," Morrison cut him off. "I've already ordered every fusion plant in the solar system to begin power storage procedures. When we launch Operation Silent Thunder, it will be with everything we have." She turned to address the room. The Concordat started this war thinking they had an insurmountable technological advantage. They never considered that their reliance on that technology would be their downfall. Now it's time to show them just how far that fall will be. Thompson studied the production numbers. Even with 50 devices, we can't cover all their territory. We don't need to, Morrison replied. We just need to hit their key command and control nodes simultaneously. Cut off the head, and the body will follow. She brought up a list of target systems. Colonel Thompson, I want your best Wolfpack squadrons ready for deep penetration missions. Dr. Walker, begin final testing on the Mark IE devices. Lieutenant Hayes, coordinate with the merchant fleet. I want their random attacks to increase 3 days before we launch. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Morrison remained at the display, watching the pattern of battle lines shift and change. The Concordat had started this war with perfect coordination and overwhelming force. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one with the best technology, but the one who could fight without it. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESS Resilient, now the flagship of humanity's largest battle fleet since the war began. 50 ships surrounded her, each carrying a Mark IE darkwave device. Behind them, another 200 warships waited in formation, their crews ready for the most ambitious military operation in human history. All ships report ready, Admiral, Lieutenant Hayes announced. Wolfpack squadrons are in position across all target systems. Civilian merchant fleet is conducting random disruption operations as planned. Signal from Dr. Walker's team. Another officer called out. Power grid reports maximum capacity. They're ready to begin energy transfer to the devices. Morrison took a deep breath, looking at the tactical display one last time. The plan was audacious. Simultaneously activate 50 darkwave devices across the most critical Concordat systems, creating the largest zone of quantum silence ever attempted. In that darkness, Thompson's Wolfpack squadrons would strike at key military installations, while the main fleet pushed toward Earth's captured colonies. This is Admiral Morrison to all ships, she began, her voice carrying to every vessel in the fleet. In 5 minutes, we will create a darkness unlike anything in human history. Every quantum-based system across 50 star systems will go dark simultaneously. The enemy will be blind, deaf, and alone. But so will we. She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew. We've trained for this. Every ship captain, every navigator, every weapons officer has learned to fight without the technology we once thought essential. The Concordat believes us primitive for maintaining these skills. Today, we show them why humanity never fully trusted its machines. Energy transfer beginning, the science officer reported. The ship's lights dimmed slightly as power was diverted to the darkwave device. All ships, begin final countdown, Morrison ordered. Maintain radio silence. Once we enter the dark, you know your objectives. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. The seconds ticked by with excruciating slowness. On the tactical display, small lights showed Thompson's squadrons moving into attack position near their targets. The civilian merchant fleet had created a pattern of random disruptions that had the Concordat ships scattered and confused. 30 seconds, Hayes announced. Morrison watched the final power reading stabilize. Send the code phrase to all commands. The stars go silent. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The universe changed. The tactical display went dark, along with every other quantum-based system on the ship. Through the bridge windows, Morrison could see the other ships of the fleet switching to chemical thrusters and position lights, moving in pre-planned patterns like a dance choreographed in darkness. Status report, she called out. All basic systems functioning, Hayes replied, working with old-style mechanical instruments. Radio reports coming in. Darkwave field successfully generated in all target systems. Concordat fleet positions. Confirmed disrupted. The battle that followed would later be called the Silent Dance by historians. Human ships moved through space using visual signals and pre-planned maneuvers, their crews fighting with instruments that would have been familiar to World War II sailors. The Concordat forces, cut off from their command network for the first time in their military history, fell into complete disarray. Colonel Thompson's voice crackled over the short-range radio. "This is Wolfpack Actual. Primary targets neutralized in sectors 7 through 12. The Concordat ships, they're not even trying to fight back. Most of them are just drifting." Similar reports began coming in from other sectors. Without their neural network, the Concordat military had lost not just their coordination, but their basic ability to function. Centuries of reliance on their technology had left them unable to operate without it. "All ships, press the advantage," Morrison ordered. "Reclaim our colonies. Show them what humanity can do in the dark." As the battle continued, she allowed herself a small smile. The stars had gone silent, but in that silence, humanity's voice had never been louder. The peace conference chamber aboard the neutral station Artemis held an unexpected scene. Admiral Morrison watched as a Concordat high commander struggled to hold a simple stylus, its multi-fingered hand trembling with the effort of writing without neural assistance. "We have forgotten," the alien commander said, its translator converting complex harmonics into English. "So much has been lost to time and technology. Our young ones no longer know how to write without neural links. Our ship captains cannot navigate without the network. We have evolved past independence, and in doing so, we have made ourselves vulnerable." Dr. Walker, standing beside Morrison, nodded sympathetically. "Technology should enhance natural abilities, not replace them. That was humanity's greatest lesson from our own digital age." The conference room's displays showed the current state of the galaxy. Darkwave devices had been deactivated across most systems, but several remained active in key strategic locations, a reminder of the new balance of power. "Your request for human military advisors is approved," Morrison stated, watching as Colonel Thompson entered with a group of junior officers. "They'll begin training your crews in manual navigation, combat operations, and independent decision-making." The Concordat commander's skin shifted to a shade that Dr. Walker had learned to recognize as indicating deep emotion. "The irony does not escape us. We once considered your reliance on manual skills to be a sign of primitive development. Now we must learn these primitive skills to survive." Morrison's expression remained diplomatic, but there was a hint of pride in her voice. "Sometimes moving forward requires taking a step back. Your technology is still centuries ahead of ours in many ways, but technology should be a tool, not a crutch." On the station's observation deck, crews from both species gathered to watch a joint training exercise. Human and Concordat ships maneuvered through a series of complex formations, the alien vessels noticeably less graceful but improving. Their crews were learning to trust their own judgment, to make decisions without constant neural connection to their command network. "They're learning faster than expected," Thompson remarked, joining Morrison at the window. Their natural abilities were always there, just dormant, like muscles that hadn't been used in generations. "And our people?" Morrison asked, though she already knew the answer. "Adapting to their technology as well. Turns out when you know how to do something the hard way, learning the easy way is simple. Their quantum computing systems are incredible once you stop relying on them for everything." Dr. Walker approached with a data pad, his expression thoughtful. "We're seeing something remarkable here. Two species learning from each other's extremes. They're rediscovering individual initiative, while we're learning to better integrate advanced technology. It's a beautiful example of cultural evolution." The Admiral watched as another group of Concordat officers arrived for training, their movements less rigid, more natural than before. "They're not the only ones who've evolved. Humanity had to remember its own strength during this war. We had to trust in skills we'd nearly forgotten." Lieutenant Hayes, now Captain Hayes, joined the group with a final status report. "The last Darkwave device has been deactivated in the outer colonies. For the first time in 3 months, Quantum communications are active across all known space. Morrison nodded, but her attention was on the training ships outside. Keep the devices in storage, not as a threat, but as a reminder. To them, and to us. A reminder of what? A young Concordat officer asked, having approached close enough to hear. The admiral turned to face the alien, seeing not an enemy but a student, a partner in the complex dance of interstellar peace. A reminder that true strength lies not in our technology, but in our ability to function without it. The stars may sing again, but we must never forget how to navigate in silence. Outside the station's windows, human and Concordat ships continued their dance, each learning from the other, each growing stronger through the exchange. The war had ended not with the destruction of either side, but with a recognition of a fundamental truth. The greatest power lay not in technology itself, but in the wisdom to know when not to use it.